Hello everyone, I'm delighted to finally be able to share with you my thoughts on the Hot Toys 1/6 scale 1989 Batman figure. Now, for all intents and purposes, this is essentially a re-release because Hot Toys did release this very same figure a good 10 or 15 years ago, and I don't believe there's been any real significant changes or tweaks to this figure other than there was a deluxe version of this figure that came with a pretty fancy gargoyle stand taken directly from the end of the film. Now, sadly, I haven't opted to pay for this version, so you're just going to see the bare bones version today. So as ever, let's kick off by taking a look at the packaging, and although it's relatively simplistic, I think it's very much in keeping with the spirit of the film and the promotion that went around that film in '89. One of the things I did want to point out is this fantastic bat logo, which is actually embossed and a little bit shiny, which is pretty cool. Likewise, the lettering of the Batman logo down there as well is also embossed and catches the light beautifully. So this is really nicely done. Also along the top there where you can see the rivets, also embossed. So this is quite nice. It actually has a little bit of depth and texture for something that is relatively straightforward and just serves as a slipcase. I think they've done actually a pretty nice job of the presentation on this. There's not an awful lot to write home about when we look at the side panel. We just have a very small Batman logo there, which is kind of greyed out, and so yeah, there's no images. This isn't really something you're going to want to display. And then if we look at the reverse of the packaging, it's mostly given over to the small print. However, what we can see is the shape of the Bat logo, which is kind of cool, made out of the top and bottom tiers there that are meant to obviously represent the Batcave. That's kind of cool, very, very subtle. Again, not really displayable in its own right though. But of course, this is just a slipcase and it does slip off by lifting it up, and underneath we can see the inner packaging and the window display there demonstrating the figure and all of his various bits and pieces, which look pretty cool. The inner casing has a slightly more attractive side panel. We see a slightly larger bat symbol there. Again, it's greyed out and it's not really something you're going to put on display, but it is the inner packaging, so it's unlikely you're going to do much with this anyway. And if we look at the back of the packaging, we actually see some of his various accessories here, which, you know, looks kind of cool. Again, it's greyed out, which is unfortunate, but it's nice to see these various bits and pieces. Okay, so time to move on to the main event and take a look at the figure itself. And I have to say, visually, this is a very striking figure, as you would expect from Hot Toys. However, I do have a few gripes which we'll get into. If we start off though by taking a look at this head sculpt, I think they've done a really nice job with the proportions of the masks and the ears. The eyes are really quite striking, and I'll take a close look at those in a moment so you can really see how they've drawn out the blue in his eyes. It's very effective, very lifelike. But if we take a look here at the mouthpiece and the cowl, I think they've done a really good job of capturing Michael Keaton's likeness. Again, you would expect this from Hot Toys, but they've done a really nice job here. This looks pretty authentic to what we see on screen or in various promotional materials. If we take a slightly closer look here, you can see the detail on those eyes, and I think, you know, the light has caught them really nicely here, so you can see just how lifelike they look, and even the texturing there underneath the mask where the shading has been done around the eyes. You can see it's actually a slightly different shade, just as it is in the film, and that works really, really well. In terms of the texture of the cowl, I think this looks pretty accurate. The material they've used here is a sort of a soft rubber, and that works pretty well. It's pretty reflective of what I imagine the actual costume would look and feel like in real life. Okay, now on the face of it, and certainly from a distance, all the details of the costume look to be pretty accurate, pretty faithful to what we see on screen. However, when we get closer to it, I'm not convinced by this, and I'm a little bit surprised given that this is Hot Toys. Now, first of all, we have his bat emblem there, the logo. I'm pretty sure this should be just fractionally larger. This feels a little bit too small. Now, I could be wrong on that, but it just feels slightly smaller than it should be. I'll come back to the utility belt separately in a moment, but for now I want to focus on the main bodysuit, the rubber body stocking they've got him in, because if we look closely we can see that this is a sort of mottled rubber effect, and this isn't quite accurate to what we see on screen, because on screen in the film the costume looks to be quite smooth, and we get plenty of close-up shots to that effect in the movie where we can see that this is a very smooth look, and this is very textured and quite distracting. Now, don't get me wrong, from a distance it works absolutely fine, and I guess that's how they've intended this figure to be viewed, but up close, yeah, it's a little disappointing actually. The utility belt is kind of interesting. It's very nicely sculpted and it seems to be perfectly in proportion, and it looks great in terms of detailing and colorization. No issues there whatsoever. It does have a pretty cool feature where you can actually move those pins at the side. They will slide along. I think this is to accommodate the magnet for the accessories, as we'll see a bit later, but it is on both sides, so I'm not sure if that is strictly the case. But something that really stood out to me was this gap beneath the utility belt and the rest of the body, because you can see there's a very different texture there and quite clearly a strong groove between the body types, and it feels as if that belt should be much lower down, except when you try and push this down, there's a lot of resistance here and it doesn't really want to give. However, I did check this out and weirdly enough it does seem to be an accurate detail from the film, because there does indeed seem to be this weird disconnect between the two pieces of the costume and where the belt really should cover that. Actually, there is a bit of a gap, so I think this is actually intentional on Hot Toys' part, and they've actually been more accurate than perhaps they needed to be in terms of the visual. I don't know. The gauntlets are really nicely done. They're relatively simplistic in terms of the design, but those fins there are super sharp, which is very, very nice. And sometimes you do find yourself being stabbed by these when you're trying to pose the figure, which is, kind of cool. The other thing I wanted to point out is how interesting this was. There's actually a detail here on the hands where you can see these sort of studs on the interior of the glove. I had never noticed this in the film before, but they are in fact there. So this is a fantastic little detail that I didn't notice before I got this figure in hand, which is pretty cool. I was, however, a little bit disappointed by the boots on this figure because they are all one piece. Now, whilst they're fairly nicely sculpted, plenty of detail on them, they don't look quite accurate because in the film there's actually a number of different layers to this. The texture, like the shoe guard that he's got around the ankles, for example, is a separate piece on top. Here it's all one piece and it just looks a little bit flat and a little bit underwhelming. What's more is that obviously this is going to compromise the articulation because you see there's no join there, and I've got other figures such as the Sideshow 1/6 Darth Vader, which approaches this with much more success by actually having a separate piece here, but it's very subtle in terms of having that break, and it allows you to have maximum articulation without compromising the look or feel of the figure when it's on display. And it's kind of sad to see they haven't adopted that here. This is after all Hot Toys, and I would expect them to be making some strong innovation in this kind of area. I'll also take this opportunity to look at the base, and I do have a gripe with this. Now, I was really pleased that it comes with a pretty cool base. I really like this bat logo. Of course, it's engraved in there and it's very nicely painted, and I wouldn't expect anything else. I think this looks really good. It's really nice to have the nameplate there in metal as well. But you will notice there are these plastic lights that actually look like they're movable, which is pretty cool. And I thought, great, we'll be able to light up the base. This is really awesome. Except you can't, because the bottom of the case is actually welded shut and they've removed all the wiring from the previous release. I gotta be honest, I feel slightly shortchanged. I mean, why would you remove the wiring? I would love to have this display light up. Why have they done this? This feels like corner cutting, and on a figure of this expense, it's probably the most expensive figure I've ever bought, I would expect them to throw in the lights. Okay, I'll quickly talk about the cape now as well, which actually has a pretty decent wingspan on it. You can of course fold it back over his shoulders to show off the main body, and it looks pretty cool. Now, the cape itself has an interesting texture. It's actually pretty much identical to the Ben Affleck Justice League Hot Toys Batman figure that I have. The texture there is the same kind of strange, slightly mottled, slightly leathery kind of approach. It does have a bendy wire in the front of the cape there, allowing you to do a little bit of posing with it, but the cape itself won't actually wrap all the way around him. Now, to be fair, I don't think that ever actually happens in the movie, so I shouldn't really complain about that. But overall, there's something about the cape that just doesn't feel quite authentic. It's not quite right, and it's a little bit underwhelming. And yeah, it just often looks a little bit clunky and a little bit like stuck in certain positions in terms of it doesn't feel like it's quite flexible enough the way I want it to be. It looks a little bit clunky in certain areas. And I really wanted the texture to feel much heavier and much more like thick leather, because that's how it appears in the film. All that swishing that he does with the cape, it feels like it's much heavier and much thicker, whereas here it's fairly lightweight and it just, yeah, it kind of underwhelms a little bit. So let's take a look at the articulation. Well, first off, he has no articulation in the head. Now this is perfectly fine because of course in the film we know he couldn't turn his head, so that's fine. I don't expect that. Now, the problems we do have though is with the flexibility in this leather bodysuit, this rubber suit, because you can't really get very far. As you can see here, as you start to expand the joints out in any meaningful way, you are going to run the risk of tearing this material, and I just don't want to do that. I feel like you could get more out of this figure, but it doesn't want to give. What you'll see later is that when you do extend the arms, the gravity works against it, and it always pushes the arms back down. You'll see this in some of my shots a little bit later on. Now, he can move his arms, so I should say there is a ball joint in the shoulder there is a bicep swivel, there is a double joint at the elbow, and this works absolutely fine. As you can see here, he has no issues actually getting that all the way up there. You can get it pretty close. He can't get it quite up to his face, but you can get a good amount of maneuverability out of this. But as I said, you are running the risk of wearing out that rubber, and that does concern me. He's got the standard ball joint in the wrist, and the hand can rotate all the way around, and it can hinge forwards and backwards a little bit, but there is a little bit of resistance and blockage there from the plastic gauntlet. Now, he does have, I think, a ball joint in the waist, but again, getting him to move, it's virtually non-existent. I mean, there's just so little maneuverability with this figure, it's not even worth joking about. Likewise, good luck getting to bend forwards or backwards at all. The legs, very similar to the arms. Yes, there is a ball joint there in the hips. The legs can technically move out to the side, and not too badly. There's a little bit of give. There does appear to be a swivel at the top of the thigh, but again, it's very limited. And yeah, you can just about move the leg forward and backwards, but you know, as you can see here, I'm very, very hesitant to really do too much with this for fear of damaging the suit. Likewise, he does have a double joint in the knee, and again, you can kind of get this to about 45 degrees, maybe fractionally more, but yeah, very, very limited. Now, he can just about hinge his boot there. There's enough flexibility in that plastic to allow it to just slightly go backwards, but that's it. There's nothing else you can do with this. Now, for the record, I do appreciate that the costume in the film was very restrictive, and obviously Michael Keaton and the various people associated with the film have talked about this in great length, so I'm not completely ignorant of that fact. However, what I would say is that he actually has a lot more flexibility than you can actually demonstrate with this figure. We do get to see plenty of action scenes in that film, and you know, Michael Keaton is able to lift his arms way above his head, he's able to get kicks out and things like that. These are all poses that you will not be able to replicate with this figure. In fact, this figure is going to stand pretty much stock still like this, and the only variation you're going to have is what you do with the arms. However, where Hot Toys have come into their own is with the accessories, because they've left nothing to chance here, and I have to commend them on the sheer amount of accessories we get, because we get an additional 3 pairs of hands. We get his Batarang with looped cable. We get this, I can't remember what this is, I'm not sure, but hey, it's really cool that we've got it. Of course, he's got his grapple gun, and we'll take a close look at that in a moment because that's pretty cool. He's got 2 throw-in stars. I don't even remember him having throw-in stars in this film. He has 3 of these darts. Again, I've no idea where they appear in the film, and I just saw it recently, so I'm not sure where they are, but it's great to have some extra pieces. We get his Batmobile remote control. We get Vicky Vale's shoe. We get two additional faceplates with 2 very different expressions. We get the zipline thingy-mabob, sorry, don't know the official name for it, and we also have these 2 rods as well, and I'll show you what they do in a moment. We also get this little thingy-majig to help actually change the eyes, because you can move the direction of the eyes inside the head, and we also get this pretty cool wrist guard that he uses to offensive effect in the film. So, those plastic rods, if you take a look at the cape, you will find there is a little hole on either side of the cape. You take the rod and you insert it in. This creates a sturdy rigidity to the outer cape, which he can then hold the remainder of the rod in his hands, and he's able to create that pose where he's able to really lift the cape up as he does at the beginning of the film. Now, I've really struggled to actually recreate it as in its extreme as they demonstrate on various promotional photographs for this this figure, this is about as good as I could get it, which is still pretty striking and looks great on display, but it's not quite as striking as it should be, and I don't think I've got it to work quite the way it can do, but I found this to be a bit of a struggle and a little bit fiddly, to be honest with you, so just something to be mindful of. As for this offensive, wrist guard thing, this is, again, a really cool thing, because it's something I've never consciously taken in the movie, because it's so quick, but it's great that Hot Toys have included this, because it's such a cool little detail. Now, in order to be able to set it, essentially, what you have to do is find this very narrow slot in the gauntlet to slide it into. This took me a while to find, but once you do, it actually slides in fairly easily, although, again, you're going to be limited. You can only use it with this flat palm hand, naturally, but it can be a bit fiddly, so just be careful with this when you're doing it, because there is a risk of bending the plastic. The Batarang is very nicely sculpted. It's got the silver highlights at the bottom edges there, which look great, and of course it has string coming out of the bottom there, which he can hold in his other hand if you so wish. Now, in terms of getting into his grip, yeah, it can work with the hands that you're given. It never looks quite right to me, and I'm never able to get it into a position where I'm really think it looks really effective, actually. So somehow this kind of looks a little bit disappointing. Now, I did mention before about the arm dropping, so if you watch carefully on the right hand side, you'll see that his hand with the Batarang is just ever so slightly dropping down there. This was much higher when I started just pressing record on the camera. So then he's got this nice extra little piece as well, which I'm not sure what this is. Is it a Geiger counter? A timer, detonator, I'm not sure. Someone in the comments, no doubt, will let me know. But it is really nicely sculpted and nicely painted. This looks absolutely fantastic, and he has no issues gripping this in his hand at all. This looks pretty cool. It looks to be fairly accurate in terms of scaling, I assume, since I don't actually remember it. But hey, it looks good, actually, I have to say. That's the point of trying to make it. It looks like a really fun accessory, and being silver actually stands out quite nicely against the black of his costume. The Batmobile remote is a really cool extra piece. It's such a little thing, and it's amazing they included this. And yeah, it's actually little, actually physically little as well, but it actually is nicely, finely painted. We can see the bat symbol on it and the microphone, and it looks really good. And he's able to actually get his arm up fairly close to his mouth to be able to replicate what we see in the film. It's not quite accurate, you can't get it quite all the way there because he holds it fairly close in the film, but nevertheless, this looks pretty good, and I think they've done a nice job, especially with the scaling there, and it's really good they've included a hand that allows him to just grip this specifically, because it's such a small piece, it could so easily fall through any standard grip. Then he has 3 of these things, and honestly, I've just seen the film, and I don't know what they are. I don't remember seeing them in the film, but again, he can hold it in that extra tight grip nice and comfortably, so I'm not entirely sure what he's supposed to do with these, if he does indeed hold them. Apologies if I'm missing something really obvious, but I just don't recall what these are for, but nevertheless, he can hold them great, and he looks pretty good while doing it. Likewise, I don't recall the shurikens or the throwing stars, but these are really nicely sculpted and painted pieces with a lot of detail on them for such a small piece. And again, with that extra tight gripping hand, he's able to hold these very comfortably, so this looks great. Vicky Vale's shoe is a cool and unexpected little extra piece there, and why not? Of course, he does pick it up at the end of the film as he's going up the bell tower there, and I think it's kind of cool that they've included this. Yeah, this looks good. And then we come to the grapple gun, and this is obviously one of his major pieces in the film, and they've done a really nice job of bringing it to life in such a small scale. They've done really well to draw out all the details. Now, what you will notice is that this is folded up, and you can actually slide it out there to extend the handle. On the handle, you'll notice there's a little black square there. That is a magnet so that it will attach to his utility belt, which also has a magnet in there. That's a really cool little feature, something I wasn't expecting, and I think they've done a nice job with this. Of course, it does fold up compact, but you can also take off the tip there. Just as he does in the film, he assembles this from his utility belt, and you can recreate that with your 1/6 scale figure. But first, as you can see, he can hold this here. It's not as snug a grip as I would like, and that handle, as you can see, is a little bit flimsy for him to be able to grip onto because it is so thin. But nevertheless, once it is in his grip, it's fairly secure and it looks pretty good. Now, this is about the best I could do with this in terms of being able to get his arm lifted up high. He's not really able to obviously point up very high so that it looks as if he's about to shoot the grapple gun up into the air. This is about as good as it gets. Now, of course, you can have the arm extended out. The arm will drop over time with gravity because of that costume, the rubber bodysuit, but this again, is probably about the best I was able to manage with it. Now, ideally, I would like the arm to be straight, and I would like it to be a little bit taller, but, well, what can you do? Now, the top part of the grapple actually has a bit of a hook on it, and this is supposed to hook onto the belt. Now, it's a little bit fiddly because there's not much room there, as you can see. Now, I've been able to just about squeeze mine in, but it's not a very comfortable fit. Likewise, with the magnet on the belt there, this looks a little bit sloppy. It does fit together, but I'm not able to get it as neat and as compact and it's looking as authentic as they do in the photography around this figure. Now, this might just be me being slightly clumsy with it. Maybe there's a particular knack that I'm not employing, but this doesn't look quite right to my eyes. Okay, and then we have this contraption, which is very, very nicely done. What a beautiful piece in terms of all the detail here and the paint. Obviously, we can see the gold and the silver. There's also a very, very tiny spring in there as well, allowing you to be able to articulate and move these two prongs so they can either face front or they can poke out to the side as they do in the film. So it's actually articulated and it looks pretty cool. It's a little bit fiddly to get onto his wrist. Of course, you have to remove the hand, slide it along fairly comfortably, and then try and get the hand back into the peg there, and that's not very easy in truth. It's a bit uncomfortable and the hand doesn't always connect into the joint quite as easily as I would hope when wearing this. That being said though, it does look pretty impressive. Again, the standard issue remains in terms of being able to get his arm up high enough to make it look as authentic as it does in the film. But nevertheless, this looks pretty striking and it's a really cool piece. It's been very carefully thought out and is pretty effective, so I think that deserves commendation. Then, of course, we have the other faceplate. So we have this slightly open-mouthed version. I think it's taken from this scene in the film, which isn't quite right because this is more of a smirk, but I could be wrong. It could be taken from somewhere else. Nevertheless, it's a cool, different look for the character, and it's great to see the extra detailing there on the teeth. Then we have my personal favourite, which is the blood-stained version, the end of the film version, where obviously he's seen a little bit of battle there. He's having that fight with the Joker, and he's got all the cuts and abrasions to his face, and this looks great. And he's even got a slight smirk here as well, which is really cool. So there's a lot of detail here in the teeth, the lips, the cuts. It all looks incredibly authentic, like very, very realistic, and this looks absolutely fantastic. So for my money, this is the best way to display the figure because it just looks so cool and so ready for action, which is fantastic. Okay, the one thing I haven't shown you is actually how to remove the head and how to adjust the eyes. That's because I've had a bad experience before. I do have the Hot Toys Ben Affleck Justice League figure, which had an issue with this head where, it did actually snap off when I tried to change the head. So I'm very, very hesitant, basically, to remove the head. And I don't really want to adjust the eyes. It feels too fiddly and too complicated. And really, I just want them looking straight ahead anyway. I don't really want them looking off to the side. So I'm sorry I'm not able to demonstrate that, but I'm just too much of a wimp to even try it. And so, there we have it. There's my thoughts on the 1/6 scale Hot Toys Michael Keaton 1989 Batman figure. This is one of my most wanted figures of all time in this scale. I love the 1989 Batman. You probably know that by looking at my channel. You see the amount of videos I've done covering this version of Batman across the years. It feels very timely having this be reissued on the 85th anniversary of the character. I feel like I've done quite a lot to celebrate Batman this year, and this is probably the icing on the cake. Now, the figure is not without its flaws. There's definitely minor little gripes in there, which are a little bit disappointing and surprising, actually, from Hot Toys. And I think the biggest criticism I have of the figure is just how limited it is in terms of being able to pose it and make it do all the stuff I want it to do. Likewise, not hugely impressed by the mottled rubber effect. I'm not sure why this just isn't smoother, but all that taken aside, I still think this makes a very striking visual when you put it on display. There's no doubt about it. From a distance, this looks absolutely incredible, and you get so many accessories to make up for the lack of articulation to really help him stand out in terms of that display opportunity. So I think it probably just about balances out. And all in all, yes, I'm still very happy with this figure, and I'm really glad to have him in my collection, which I think is ultimately a recommendation. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please do consider giving the video a like. That kind of thing really does help the channel out and it allows me to keep making more content. And if you're interested in seeing more content, remember to hit subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos coming soon.